Welcome, everybody. Good afternoon. So glad that you're here for today's Jewish Gen Talk with Jarrett Ross. As we always do, we invite you to share in the chat where you are logging in from. And as people log in, you can let us know and we'll get started shortly. So we have Leslie Watt from Arcadia, Wisconsin. Leslie, so nice to have you with us. Leslie was on our Neshama program this past summer, and it was wonderful to be together. We have someone from Tel Aviv, Daniel in Scottsdale, Arizona, David in Melbourne, Australia. We have Yoel. I couldn't see where Yoel was from. We have Howard from New Jersey. Wow, it's coming in so quickly. Columbia, Maryland, Chicago. We have someone in Jerusalem, Shane in Jerusalem. Welcome. So glad that you're with us. We have Phil Barenthal in Iowa. We have Sharon Ramirez in Jacksonville. We have Indianapolis, Indiana. Sarah from Boston, Massachusetts. Eric Block, one of our volunteers from Milwaukee. So nice to have you with us, Eric. For everybody who's logging in, we are so glad to be here with Jarrett Ross, is our speaker for today. Please put it in the chat where you are logging in from. We'll get started soon. I see Renee Garbus is here. Welcome. So nice to have you with us. Another Neshama alumnus. We have Talia, who's saying hello to their neighbor in Durham. So welcome to both people who are here. And Jared, I think that's probably you. We have Scott in Austin, Texas. We have people from around the world, and we're really so glad and honored that you are here with us today. I think we are ready to get started. My name is Avram Grohl, and I'm privileged to oversee JewishGen, which is the Jewish Genealogical Research Division of the Museum of Jewish Heritage, a living memorial to the Holocaust. And today's talk is part of our ongoing Jewish Gen Talk series of educational webinars, whereby we bring speakers from throughout the Jewish genealogical world and really throughout the Jewish world to talk to us about different components of how we could research our family trees and learn more about our roots and to strengthen our sense of Jewish identity. And today we are very privileged to be joined by someone who has developed a deep expertise in many different areas of genealogy, including Sephardic research, and for our purposes today on DNA. He's going to talk to us about how we can overcome some of the complexities, the inherent complexities in doing DNA from a Jewish perspective. Jarrett has a long history in the Jewish genealogy world. He started in 2009. He has a personal tree with tens of thousands of people. He has connected with thousands of relatives around the world. He has helped build hundreds of trees for others. He has a blog called Sephardic Genealogy. He runs 2 YouTube channels, and he has served as the lead forensic genetic genealogist at DNA Labs International. He is a board member at the International Association of Jewish Genealogical Societies. He's a vice president of the Triangle Jewish Genealogical Society, and an all-around great guy. So, Jared, we're very happy you're with us today. Just a little bit of housekeeping. We are recording this presentation, and for those of you who are on and who registered, you'll have advanced access to the program before we make it public. If you'd like to ask questions, Jarrett said he'd be glad to take them. We'll probably only have 10 or 15 minutes or so, but please post the questions in the Q&A. I would just say that a lot of questions might be covered. So maybe if you want to wait a little bit to post questions just to see if they're, they might be answered within the presentation itself. But then Jarrett will try to go through them at the end. Following the program, we will send out a survey and a recording, and I hope that you will very much enjoy this. Jarrett, I am going to pass it over to you.
Thank you so much, Avrami. Thank you for having me. Thank you, everybody, for joining me today for this talk. And today's talk is Success with Jewish DNA, How to Overcome Issues of Endogamy. And so to start out, we're going to just talk about the basics of recombination, the inheritance of DNA. So here I just created a quick image of a couple of couples. And basically we have this couple right here we have the wife on the left, and we can tell that because she has two X chromosomes. We have the husband on the right. He has an X chromosome and a Y chromosome. And then in between these tall lengths, those are the autosomal DNA, the autosomes. So that's the DNA that we're dealing with ancestry or 23andMe, things like that. And at the top, we have the mitochondrial DNA. And the coloring just represents ancestors. So for this couple here, the red represents the woman's mother, the green represents the woman's father. Here, the blue represents the man's mother, and the orange represents the man's father. Well, then they have a child, and here they have a son. And so we can see how the inheritance goes down. So the mitochondrial DNA from the mother goes to the child. So both boys and girls inherit the mitochondrial DNA from their mother. For the sex chromosomes, the X and Y, male will inherit an X chromosome that is a recombined X from their mother, and they'll inherit a Y chromosome from their father that stays largely unchanged. And then with the autosomes, for both what they're inheriting from their parents, we get a lot of recombination. And so this is just to kind of get a general idea of what recombination looks like. So we have another couple over here, and instead of having a son, they have a daughter. And so we can see the only major difference is that the X chromosome from the mom is also recombined, but instead of getting a Y chromosome, this daughter gets an X chromosome from her father. There's nothing to recombine with, so it's the same X chromosome that her father has, but the mitochondrial DNA is coming from mom, and the autosomal DNA is a mixture of all of the grandparents. But then let's say that they have children. So let's see a daughter and a son, assuming that they were to have the exact same recombination. And we see everything mixing further in that same inheritance pattern. The daughter receives an X chromosome from the father, an X chromosome from the mother. The autosomal DNA is a mixture of recombination. And you can see how with each generation, that amount of DNA is getting smaller and smaller. So if we follow this green segment here, that's this top segment that's cut down here. And then the inheritance to the children is only this bit of it. So we see as time goes on, the segments get smaller, and that's going to be a very important part of understanding how to overcome issues with endogamy. And then with everything else, the inheritance is the same in terms of the mitochondrial DNA is coming from mom, the Y chromosome is coming from dad, and the X chromosomes from mom are recombined, while the X chromosomes from dad aren't. So this is just basic inheritance. And I always like to go over that just as a way to just get people who don't quite understand recombination to understand just the basics of it. So the next concept we want to talk about with this is identical by descent versus identical by chance, or what's IBD versus IBC. Identical by descent is a fancy term to basically say that when you see two pieces of DNA shared between two people, or when you see DNA shared between two people, it's identical because they inherited it from the same ancestor, because they descend from the same ancestor. That is identical by descent. If it's DNA where they're sharing DNA, when you compare the DNA, but in reality that's not a true match, that it's a false positive, that's known as an identical by chance, a matching segment of DNA shared by two or more people that has not been inherited from a recent common ancestor. And when we're dealing with endogamy, we get a spike of these identical by chance segments. And we'll get into a little bit of why that happens. But here I have an image that I took from the ISOGG wiki. And we can see that there's this couple here. And a similar to the last slide, just seeing kind of the inheritance pattern, they're only showing autosomal DNA here. We can see that these two people who are cousins, their parents or siblings, they share this piece of DNA. Well, that piece of DNA is identical because they both descend from the same ancestor. So that's why we get IBD and IBC. So when we're looking at DNA and we're looking at how much DNA we match with people, how big are these segments, and what's the total number of DNA, we can use that to figure out how distant our relationship is about to that person. And there are a lot of tools out there to help people understand that. One of the most used tools is this one right here, the Shared Centimorgan Project. And the Shared Centimorgan Project is created by Blaine Bettinger. It's been going on for many years. He collects tons and tons of data from people who submit it. And using that, then he's able to create this chart. And we can see here there's the self, and then it shows you how much DNA you would expect to share. And it shows it in what's known as centimorgans. So a centimorgan is really just a length of shared DNA, in the same way that a centimeter is a length of distance. So here with a parent, we have the average, which is 3,485 centimorgans. And then we have the general range of what you get with a parent, 2,376 to 3,720. And then we have that for all sorts of relationships, siblings, half siblings, half cousins, third cousins, great grandparents, etc. And so we can use this table when we see how much DNA do we share to then figure out, well, what are the likely ways that we're related? But Jewish DNA is a bit different. And the biggest reason for that is due to endogamy. So while we can use those tables when we're dealing with Jewish DNA, it often will fall outside of those ranges or on the extreme ends of the ranges to make it seem like it's really pointing a different way. And a lot of this is due to what's known as endogamy. And a lot of people have probably heard that. Obviously, it's in the name of the talk. But what is endogamy? Well, endogamy is just generations upon generations of people marrying and having children only within a specific population group. And this can happen for all sorts of reasons, geographical, so island populations, also religious, obviously with Jewish families, even though Judaism is a religion, it has been around so long and endogamy has gone on so long that it's what's known as an ethno-religion, that there is an ethnicity of Jewish as well as the religion of Judaism, but they're tied together because of that endogamy. And what endogamy causes is causes the people within that population group to share more DNA with each other than people from non-endogamous population groups. And this can vary in how much the endogamy affects the DNA. So, for an example, Pacific Island populations, the issues they deal with in DNA because of their endogamy is much worse than what we deal with Jewish DNA, because their endogamy was much more severe because of the geographical implications of where they were, and they don't have as many people going out and coming in, and thus they're going to be related in many ways, and thus they have more shared DNA, higher amounts of centimorgans than we would expect with what we saw in that table before in the Shared Centimorgan Project. But it's kind of hard sometimes to think of what endogamy is exactly, even though we can define it, but what does it actually look like? And the main thing people think of, and this is a part of endogamy, but not as much as a lot of people think, it can vary between different population groups as well, but pedigree collapse. This is just cousins marrying cousins, whether it's a first cousin marrying a first cousin or it's third cousins marrying each other, it's still a pedigree collapse. And the idea of pedigree collapse is just when you have cousins marrying cousins, the shared ancestors that they have, all of their descendants now have those ancestors in both ways through the mom and the father. And so that means when you look at the entire pedigree, it's collapsed in the distance because they're shared people. They're people that show up multiple times in that generation. But it's more than just pedigree collapse when we're dealing with endogamy, and especially when it comes to Jewish endogamy, it's in multiple relations that are a big piece of it. So a great example of what a multiple relation is what's known as double cousins. So double cousins, to understand, let's see this. We have this family right here. We have a mom and a dad, and they have two sons. And then here we have another family, a mom and a dad, and they have two daughters. Well, let's say those two daughters meet these two sons, and they get married and both couples have children. Well, those children are double first cousins because they are first cousins through their fathers and they're first cousins through their mothers. So they're going to share twice as much DNA than you would expect for a first cousin because they're first cousins two times. So they end up looking more like half siblings when it comes to the DNA. Another great example, which is actually something a lot of us deal with in Jewish families because of a lot of the Jewish customs we have, and that's what's known as three-quarter siblings. So three-quarter siblings is when you have a couple, they have a child, and then let's say the mom passes away. Well, the husband then remarries the sister of his first wife, and then they have a child. Well, those two children are three-quarter siblings. And this is because they are half siblings because they share the same father, and they're first cousins because their mothers are sisters. So this means that they are related technically in two ways, and so they're going to have more DNA than a typical half sibling or a first cousin. Now, this is not the only thing obviously happening with endogamy. This is really happening with lots and lots of distant relations. And that can be really hard to see sometimes, and especially hard to see in our own family trees when we're coming from Eastern European Ashkenazi Jewish. But I come from Dutch Jewish ancestry, both Ashkenazi and Sephardi, and we have the ability to actually see this because the records for us trace back to the 17th century. And when you can build out the family trees that far, you start to see how you're going to be related to everybody in a lot of ways. So a great way I always like to show this is to show how I'm related to Steve Jaron. For those who are unfamiliar with Steve, he is the president of the Pittsburgh Jewish Genealogical Society, very involved in a lot of Jewish genealogy stuff. So I imagine many of you know him, but he's a cousin to me in many ways. And we have it both through the paper trail and through DNA showing how we are likely related in multiple ways. So first, let's go through the paper trail. Steve and I are 12th cousins through our shared ancestor Levi Drucker, who was born in 1579, and that is through our mother's lines. We are also 11th cousins one times removed through our ancestor Benjamin Svab, born in 1595, also through our mother's lines. And we're 10th cousins once removed through Samuel Elkin Levy, who lived from 1629 to 1702, also through our mothers, because that's where both of our Dutch Jewish Ashkenazi lines come from. So we have three paper trail ways that we are related. But funny enough, even though it's through both of our mothers' lines, our mothers don't match each other on DNA. But we have a lot of other DNA matching in our trees. And because Steve and I are genealogy obsessed people, we have multiple people in our family tested, including both of our parents. So when we look at all the DNA comparisons, my father matches Steve's mother at 44 centimorgans. So even though it's a very small amount, probably does represent actual ancestry that they share. It probably is identical by descent. But with endogamy, it may be multiple distant ancestries that my father shares with Steve's mother. But either way, that 44 centimorgans indicates a fourth possible connection between Steve and I. Then my mother also matches Steve's father at 60 centimorgans. Now, I should mention my dad did not match Steve's dad on DNA, but that doesn't necessarily mean that if we were build out perfect family trees by the 1600s, we probably could find shared ancestry between both of our parents or both of our fathers. But when it comes to matching my mom against them, she doesn't match Steve's mother, but matches Steve's father at 60 centimorgans. So that's a fifth likely way that we're connected. And then on top of that, I've had my grandmother tested, and when she tests, she matches Steve's father at 53 centimorgans, so less than my mother. And that 7 centimorgan difference could be an issue of just reading DNA and things like that, but it could also have the possibility of representing a different ancestry that my grandmother shares with Steve's father. and we just don't know it. And so my mom could be related to Steve's father in two different ways that we see through DNA. So this is to show, this is what endogamy looks like when we're looking at family trees. And then you can still, within all of these generations, there's probably multiple pedigree collapses in both of our families. And, a lot of things that we might not see going on just because even though he and I both have this Dutch Ashkenazi Jewish ancestry, that we can see the connections that are so distant, when it comes to our Eastern European Ashkenazi ancestry, which we both have, we can't find it. So this is a really important thing to understand when you're looking at your matches. So another way I like to talk about our matches is by looking at this here, which is a family tree DNA match list for my mother. And going through each column, this column is what family tree DNA estimates the relationship to be, based not exactly on the shared centimorgan project, but kind of a similar sort of thing. It's based on non-endogamous population reading understandings. This column here is the total number of shared centimorgans. This is the largest segment. This column indicates if they share X DNA on that X chromosome. And then this last column shows the proven relationship. So everyone you see in this list has a proven paper trail connection to my mother. So let's go through all the matches. So first, we have my grandmother, my mom's mom, and my first cousin, my mom's niece. And the amount that they're getting is pretty much right in line with what we'd expect. Family tree DNA guesses mother-daughter. Yes, it's my mom's mom. They guess within the range of a aunt-niece relationship. And yes, this is my mom's niece. So it's an aunt-niece relationship. But then we go to the next cousin and we can see family tree DNA is guessing first cousin, aunt-niece. But really, this is a second cousin. And when you see the range, which this range I took from the shared centimorgan project, it's 46 centimorgans to 515 centimorgans. Well outside of that actual range, not even at the high end of the range, outside of it. Now, this could be representative of a whole different connection between my mom and this cousin than what we know through the second cousin relationship. But either way, that's still a proof of endogamy. We're having all these multiple relations that are causing things to be higher. So if my mom had been adopted and someone was trying to build this family tree, they'd probably be going crazy thinking, why can't I find the connection? She should be a first cousin or an aunt or a niece or something like that. But as soon as you understand the issues of endogamy and the multiple relationships that happen all the time, then you can kind of, oh, okay, we found it this other distance, and that does fit with the endogamy. So going down to the next line, we have a guess of second cousin to fourth cousin at 125 centimorgans. And it's in the range, but it's at the high end of the range. So we are looking at third cousin once removed. So not quite outside, but still at the high end. And that's what I often find with a lot of endogamous matches. The next match, third to fifth cousin is what they guess. And yeah, they're actually right on fourth cousin, right in the middle. But this match shouldn't share any X chromosome DNA with my mother, because remember, the X chromosome is inherited from mother to daughter and son. So the daughter and son from the mother inherit the X chromosome, but from a father to the son, there is no X chromosome. It's only father to the daughter. Well, this cousin and my mom, our known relation is through their purely paternal line. So if you trace up my mom's father's line and this cousin's father's line, that's how they connect. Well, the X chromosome is not inherited through the patrilineal lines. And so that X chromosome match between them must be representative of a different connection or a possible identical by chance segment, a false positive segment. Next cousin, second to third cousin, but here we go again, another one right outside of that range. Then we have another second to third cousin outside of that range, third to fifth cousin, end of the range, and then a fourth cousin, a remote cousin. Fifth cousin is kind of within that. When they say remote cousin, I always kind of like to think of that as sixth cousin or further. So kind of within that range, but still a little bit at the higher end. So that's one of the things that I find, but I like to show this because this is showing the real world what it looks like. Now, we do have projects similar to the Shared Centimorgan project, and the one to talk about is Laura Diamond's Ashkenazi DNA survey. And I've included a link here. I believe she's still taking submissions. So if you haven't, data, send it in. The more data, the better. And we have an example of one of the tables over to the left. It's a little bit of an older, or more simplified coded sort of table. So not as nice looking as the Shared Centimorgan project necessarily, but a lot of great data. And so there's this table first. We have table 1, and this includes all data points, all the people that submitted their DNA, regardless of Ashkenazi ancestry. But one of the things that a lot of us have noticed right off the bat was as soon as you would find people where they weren't fully Jewish, it would change how the endogamy affected things. And especially when you looked at people that were maybe only a quarter Jewish, or maybe they only had one great grandparent who was Jewish, it was a lot easier to figure things out because we weren't dealing with all of this multiple possible relationships through all these other lines. So Laura's survey goes at that and has multiple other tables with a lot of great information. So table number 2 is looking at both individuals who are 100% Ashkenazi. So table 1 doesn't matter if they're 100%, 50%, 25%, whatever. This is only individuals who are 100% Ashkenazi. Table 3 is 100% to 50% comparison. Table 4 is a 50% to 50% comparison. So only people that are both 50%. Table 5 looks at people who are 100% Ashkenazi versus 25%. And then table 6 looks at those who are 50% versus 25%. And so we get a lot of great information by seeing the different data points of how Ashkenazic they are. Now we'll get into it in a bit. I wish we would talk about this more as like a Jewish world overall, because of my experience, Sephardim are very similar. But just to show it, we have this is what the second table looks like. And I know it is a little bit hard to read, so I have a slide to make it a lot easier to see the comparisons. So here we have the data from Laura's survey, and I've included both the 100% Ashkenazi Jewish readings and the all submission readings. And then here we have Blaine Bettinger's Shared Centimorgan project. And so we're going to call this the non-endogamous readings. And so when we look at this, we can see the average that they get on the Shared Centimorgan project for a first cousin is 866 centimorgans. And then here for all submissions, it's 922.4. And for 100% Ashkenazi Jewish, it's 926.58. And we'll notice with the both 100% Ashkenazi Jewish, it's always larger than the all submissions. But the big comparison we're going to look at here is Blaine Bettinger's project versus the 100% Ashkenazi Jewish. And when we compare that, the 100% Ashkenazi Jewish is 7% higher than the non-endogamy, the Shared Centimorgan project. And what we'll notice, and we kind of looked at this when I showed the match list for my mom, is that as we get out to further distances, that's when things start to get worse and worse in terms of the endogamy affecting what we'll see with DNA. So where the first cousin once removed is a 15.3% difference. Second cousin is a 22.2% difference. Second cousin once removed is a 39.8% difference. A third cousin is a 66% difference. A third cousin once removed is a 67.3% difference. A fourth cousin is a 73.9% difference. And look at this. 35 centimorgans versus 60.87. That's, for a lot of genetic genealogists, they would look at that and place those in two very different categories if they got matches like that. There is overlap, obviously, between what possible relationship that could be if we got that, but it's such a big difference. Now, once we get to fourth cousin once removed, it starts to kind of drop off. And as you get further out, it kind of goes up and down. But I think that's largely more due to a lack of data in Laura's survey, as well as the deal with, for one, a lot of Jews can't confirm fourth cousins, but also when you are dealing with fourth cousin distance of DNA, that's where you're starting to get to the distance where you might not even share any DNA with that relationship. So you might have fourth cousins where you have no shared DNA, but the paper trail is true when you are cousins. So this is to get an idea of really what we're dealing with. But like I mentioned, what about Sephardim? This is a question I get all the time. And in my opinion, in my experience, very similar. Now, I will say most of my experience has dealt with Western Sephardic Jews as opposed to the Eastern Sephardic Jews who were in the areas of the Ottoman Empire, as well as the North African Sephardic Jews. But I still have, in my experience with Sephardim, I have not found any major difference between what we see in terms of the DNA results and how endogamy affects that. But along with this question, one of the questions I often get in these talks, and I figured I'd make a point about it in the talk, is about the admixtures. And most especially, can they tell Sephardic ancestry? And I always like to put up this meme: when you're Jewish, but your admixture shows small non-Jewish percentages, must be Sephardi. And this is from the History Channel show about aliens. And this was kind of the alien guy where the whole thing was, we can't explain it, must be aliens. And so that's the same sense here, where that's kind of what a lot of people fall into. They know 100% Ashkenazi ancestry. They get non-Ashkenazi readings in their admixture and they go, oh, is it Sephardi? Could be, might not be. So what we're going to do is we're going to look through a whole bunch of admixtures that are a mixture of people of varying Ashkenazi and Sephardi ancestries. So first, we're going to start off with my mom, and she's 15% Sephardic, 85% Ashkenazi, about. Now, with recombination, it's very random how it happens. It's never a perfect, split every single generation. So you might inherit 22% from grandma and 28% of your DNA from grandpa. So it can vary. So we only estimate about what do we know on the ancestry. And so you can see 93% is being lumped in with Ashkenazi Jewish. They are giving a 1% Sephardic reading, which I should say this is the July update from earlier this year, the first time Ancestry's rolled out Sephardic Jewish readings. But then everything else is being lumped into this other Mediterranean stuff: Aegean Islands, Northern Italy, Egypt, Spain. So it's basically lumping that Sephardi ancestry, likely part in the Ashkenazi, a lot into this Mediterranean stuff, and then 1% is being read as Sephardi. Here we have her family tree DNA readings: 91% Ashkenazi, 7% Italian Peninsula, less than 2% Sephardic ancestry. So they are picking up on the Sephardic, but it seems like a lot of it's kind of more getting thought of as Italian or Mediterranean areas. Here we have the MyHeritage results, and 85.1% Ashkenazi, which is funny to me that it's MyHeritage is the most spot on here, because I know that that's a company. Not everybody likes their admixtures, and we're all kind of ready and waiting for them to fully roll out the updates. But with my mom's rest of the readings, Balkan 5.7, Italian 1.9, and Sephardic 7.3. So we can see the varying differences. Now let's look at my dad, who, as far as we know, is 100% Ashkenazi, and Ancestry, their most recent update, gives him that. The last update did not have him with that. It had him with a couple of percentages of a couple of things around the Mediterranean. I don't remember exactly what. That's all gone now. Here's his reading from Family Tree DNA. He's getting 94% Ashkenazi, then he's getting 6% Italian, less than 1% Bedouin, less than 1% Yemenite Jewish. And, with the amount of information we don't know in my dad's family tree, it's possible there's something like that in the ancestry, because my great grandmother is one of my great grandmothers is a brick wall. So there's a lot we don't know behind her, but we can't say for sure if it's Sephardi or non, or what it could be. And then here we have the MyHeritage reading at 95.4% Ashkenazi, 1.5% Italian, and then 3.1% Mizrahi. Look at some more 100% Ashkenazi. We have my grandmother. Here's her ancestry. Here's her family tree DNA. And here's her MyHeritage, which the North and Western European, that was a little out of left field, I think. Now we have just another 100% Ashkenazi to see. And we can see that they're getting, a couple of random things that we wouldn't expect. Magyar, maybe not as much. They're kind of from that area of the Balkans, near the Pale of Settlement, but Ireland, northeastern Siberia. So, just to show with 100%, even when all you know is 100% Ashkenazi, you can get these varying readings and you can't say whether it's Sephardi or not. Maybe it is, maybe it's not, maybe it's the actual ancestry that they're telling you it is. It's a multitude of what it could be. Here we have a older ancestry reading, which I need to get the person who did this to send me the update, but 30% Sephardic, 70% Ashkenazi. In the older reading, they were getting Jewish 78%, and then they were getting a hodgepodge of other stuff, which I'm curious now what they'll be getting in Sephardic. But then with their family tree DNA, this is what that person's getting, and they're getting 82% Ashkenazi, and then a serious hodgepodge of all sorts of stuff with only less than 1% Sephardi. And with that person's family tree, from what I understand last I spoke to them, their family tree is very well built out and confirmed with DNA matches in a lot of lines. So they would be able to account for a lot of this stuff if it were truly in their ancestry. Then to just see another one from them, we have this, they're my heritage results, which is 69.8% Ashkenazi, and then the lumping of readings with a large part of it being Sephardic Jewish. Here we have one that I think a lot of folks find really interesting, and that's someone who's 100% Sephardi. And this person is coming from an Eastern Sephardi ancestry, so largely around the Ottoman Empire, and their largest reading is Italian Peninsula. And you may have noticed already that that's kind of been a theme across both Sephardi and Ashkenazi, is Italian Peninsula seems to kind of pop up in there, which makes sense if you look at plotting maps because of Italians being so close to Jews in how we're plotted. But then only 7% Ashkenazi, 24% Sephardi, which is what we would expect 100% of, and then a multitude of a lot of other stuff. Here we get there we go. Some reason wasn't going. Okay. Here we have their My Heritage, and their My Heritage results. They're only getting 16% Sephardi, 21.3% is being lumped in Ashkenazi, and we can just see it's being lumped in all sorts of other stuff. Here we have someone who's 50% French, 42.5% Ashkenazi, and 7.5% Sephardi. So I was really trying to go for a multitude of people with different ancestries. And so you can see here with 23, this is a 23andMe reading, that with with their Northwestern European, their French, that's coming out pretty strong, 50.6%. Their Ashkenazi is 45.2%, a little bit higher than what we would expect. And then a lumping in of all sorts of other stuff, which all seem very connected to what we would know is, or what we would think, okay, if they have 7.5% Sephardi ancestry, this stuff would kind of make sense with that a little bit. So just to see a multitude of things. Here is another person, 50% European, 35% Ashkenazi, 15% Sephardi. This is the old ancestry reading, and they're getting a 44% Jewish reading. And then they're getting a whole multitude of other stuff, a large amount, which makes sense with their European ancestry, which is a mix of things. And then the last results we're going to look at are some Jamaican Jewish results, and a few of them. So the first one is someone who's 62.5% Ashkenazi, 25% Sephardi, 12.5% European, and this is the updated ancestry. And we see they're getting a 12% Sephardi reading, which we'd expect higher based on what we know on the family tree. But it does make sense seeing that, we've got 63% Ashkenazi Jewish, which is almost right on what we'd expect. But then our European, Spain, is way more than what we'd expect. And honestly, the European we know for this person would be more of that Germanic Europe. It was basically like a French Alsace-Lorraine ancestry. So with Spain and Germanic Europe, that's probably where it's falling in. And then being from a Jamaican ancestry, they're also getting some of that Benin and Togo, which their ethnic groups show connected to Jamaica. So you can see that mixture here. And then here we have siblings. So these are two different people, but they are siblings who are 65% African, 20% European, 6.25% Sephardi, and 6.25% Ashkenazi. And just to point out their Ashkenazi and Sephardi, we have 9% Ashkenazi, 6% Sephardi for this sibling. And then we have 5% Sephardi and 7% Ashkenazi for this sibling. So this was just to show a multitude of admixtures, because this is a question people get all the time. And I get all the time of, what can we get from these admixtures? And the honest truth with it is you're really not going to get much out of it other than a very generalized idea of what might be going on in the ancestry. It's really all about the DNA matches and using those. Well, how do we use those? So now let's get into what I think is the best part of the presentation: ways to use your Jewish DNA results. Ways to do this: confirm the paper trail, which that includes finding known relatives in your matches. You just look and see, oh, I know this is my second cousin. You've proven your paper trail. Get relatives to test. You want to prove that great grandma and great grandpa are your great grandparents? Get your second cousin to test. So you can do that. Also, identifying a non-paternal event. So kind of the opposite of confirming the paper trail in a sense, but basically looking at the DNA and going, oh, wow, I know that this cousin DNA tested. They're not showing up as a match to me, but they are showing up as a match to whoever. Then there must be something wrong, and something wrong is going on. That's known as an NPE. We can also test a hypothesis. So basically, how often do we have things in our family tree where we found this family with a similar name, and we think that there's a connection between their family and our family, but we just can't find it? Well, that's a hypothesis. Get those people to test and see if you can prove it. So unknown parentage cases is a big one. Adoptees and people that have parents they don't know who is one of their parents, or maybe you have an NPE event. You find out grandma was not, or grandpa wasn't really your grandpa, it was some other guy, and now you have an unknown grandfather as your ancestor. So something like that. Unproven connections, like I mentioned, you find a family, you think there's a connection, but you can't prove it through the paper trail. DNA is a way to go. And then the biggest thing is expanding the family tree, which is really what all of this is doing. But most of all, identifying the significant matches and utilizing those to find things that you wouldn't even be able to think about just by going through the paper trail. And then once you do that, you create a hypothesis of how that connects, and then you correlate with further DNA testing in the paper trail. So now we're going to actually talk about a whole bunch of different cases of where I've done all of this stuff. So first, confirming the paper trail. And that's just as it sounds. We have this family tree of mine. Here's me, and there, I don't know why that line's missing. That should be there. There's me, my mom, my grandpa, my great-grandpa, my great-grandpa's siblings, and then the descendants, and everyone in red did a DNA test. We all matched at the amounts we would expect for that distance. Well, that proves that Abraham Nunes Vaz and Jane Moscow are truly our ancestors. Then we can take it a step further. We've got this other cousin, P. Osterman, who's matching all of us at the amounts we would expect him to. Well, that confirms that our ancestor, Morris Moscow and Esther DeHaan, are our ancestors. And a lot of the DNA sites have tools for this. The tools aren't always correct, so don't take them as face value. Use them as a hint and then research further if it's someone you don't know in there. But just to show, we have my through line, or this is my mom's through lines. So that ancestor we just looked at before, Abraham Nunes Vaz, descendants from other siblings of my great-grandfather, proving that ancestry. Take it back a step further, Abraham Nunes Vaz's mother, Reina Robles. We have all these other distant ancestors or distant relatives matching. And just to show, we have some, 18 centimorgan match, 9 centimorgan match, 46 centimorgan match. Then here we've got a 61 centimorgan match, a 59, 32. We have all these variations, but the one I like the most here is you can see how recombination brings that amount of DNA down. So we have this grandparent, 131 centimorgans. They only passed 59 shared centimorgans. And then this grandchild, 22 centimorgans. Well, a lot of people find a 22 centimorgan and they go, I don't know how true that could be, but we can see generationally. And then even more, when you look at how these matches compare to each other, you can prove, oh yeah, well, these matches, they're closer relatives. So if they truly are relatives and they should match at a higher amount, they do. That proves that between them. Then they match us at the different distance. And then we can take it even further. So here we have Reina Robles' mother, Rachel Enriquez Pimentel. And look at the amounts of DNA there. take it another generation, and this is a slightly different line, the Lopez Diaz family. So we have 10 centimorgan, 12 centimorgan, 11 centimorgan, 7, 21. Now, I should say at this point, honestly, maybe even the generation before, once you're kind of getting to this point, especially with coming from an endogamous population, even though you're getting this DNA with this match and you have this proven paper trail, we know we're likely related to these people in multiple other ways, especially if they're 100% Jewish, and even more if they have many other Jewish lines coming from a similar region that your Jewish ancestors came from. Well, that 11 centimorgans could be actually representative of actually being inherited from a completely different line. You know, we're Lopez Diaz here, but maybe that 11 centimorgans is actually through some line we share through the Diaguilar family. So once you get at this distance, you can't always say that the DNA you're sharing here is through that specific line. The DNA you share obviously is coming from ancestors. It's identical by descent, but you can't say 100% for sure which way. Now, lastly, just the last generation higher up, my mom's fifth great grandfather, my sixth great grandfather, Aaron Isaac Senior Cornell, born 1526, 1790, and died in 1793. And we can see these very small matches. But when you look at them to each other, you know, they're my mom's six cousins, but they're, what is it, first, second, third, they're fourth cousins to each other. And then, you know, so they're probably matching at a slightly higher amount. So once you actually can build these trees, it can make a big difference. But then if you think about it from an Eastern European Ashkenazi standpoint, where we have a limitation on the paper trail, that's one of the biggest issues. Endogamy makes things really difficult, but the real bigger issue is just that lack of the paper trail. And if we can get to a point where Ashkenazi Jewish families can start tracing back more consistently to the 1700s, which I feel like has been much more common nowadays, it's going to make a big difference in the DNA work as well. So when you have a confirmed match, you can also do what's known as DNA painting. And that's where you take that DNA and you put it in to a painter like this, and you can see where you're inheriting what from your chromosomes from what specific ancestors. So to simplify it, here I have it showing only my maternal side. So just to go before, you can see there's a pair of chromosomes at each spot, because remember, pairs of chromosomes. Well, here we're looking at just the maternal side. And so with just the maternal side, we can show where I'm getting what DNA. Now, my grandmother did DNA test, so I know for sure what I inherited from her, and that's what's in blue. And then everything in pink, that's what I've inherited from my grandparents, but I know what I've inherited from my grandmother. So really, it's what I've gotten from my grandfather, and that's through matching with DNA matches. But let's look at a chromosome closer, because we can see how the inheritance pattern happens with segments. And in most, especially, what is very important in that segments get smaller each generation they recombine. So here in blue, that's my grandmother. And this is my chromosome, my maternal chromosome 20. And then we can see here is pink and pink and pink and pink. And because we know this is where my grandmother's matching, this matches to a cousin of mine who I'm related to through my, or one of my first cousins. And so I know that's got to be through my grandfather, because it's not coming from my grandmother. But then we have it go another generation. So my grandfather, Myron Nunes Vaz, well, this match that's green here, that match is coming through a cousin of mine who's related through Abraham Nunes Vaz and Jane Moscow. So we know that that's coming through that line, but we see that it's smaller than what I'm inheriting from my closer relatives. Then we have another match who's even further out, who their most recent ancestor with me is my third great grandparents, Reina Nunes Vaz or Rafael Nunes Vaz and Reina Robles. And so we see that segment's even smaller. And so what we can see here is exactly what's happening with each generation of recombination. It's getting smaller and smaller. So this is a closer relationship, so it's a much larger segment. This is slowly getting further away, it gets smaller, further away, it gets smaller. And this is really important, because in overcoming endogamy, what we'll talk about in a bit, that's going to be a major part of what what the thinking is behind it. Now, here we have my chromosome 19, and this is to show some of the issues of endogamy, because remember, blue is my grandmother. Green is where I'm matching my great grandparents, Abraham Nunes Vaz and Jane Moscow. So that's through my grandfather's ancestry. But it's overlapping with my grandmother. So I have DNA from my grandmother that I'm sharing with a cousin that is related to me through my grandfather's side. And this is the endogamy thing falling in because I know this DNA I inherited from my grandmother. So that could mean that maybe this cousin is related to me somewhere through my grandmother's line as well. Could be what's known as an identical by chance segment, what we talked about before. And or it could be something else going on, but just to see that we can see it in the segments as well, that sometimes you have overlaps that don't make sense, and especially dealing with an endogamous population. So now we're going to get into using DNA to test a hypothesis. So we have this 1900 census for my family. This is my second great grandfather, Marcus Ekoff, and Fanny Ekoff, my third great grandparents, their children, Isaac, Lena, Israel, and my great grandfather, Jacob. And then they have this boarder in the house, Bessie Obschuyler. And I never thought much of it because boarder in the house, it happens all the time. You know, maybe I'll research her at some point. But then I started to think, well, who is Bessie Obschuyler? And most especially because I noticed her birthday, 1891, meaning she was 8 or 9 years old during this census. And that is not typical of a boarder. To me, that would probably be a relative of some sort. So I started to build out her family tree. And as I'm building out the tree, I'm comparing it to mine. And here's my family tree. So what we just saw before, my great grandfather, Mark Yusifkoff, and his wife, Fanny Dudas. And so looking at Bessie's tree, I found a record that showed that Bessie's mother was born Clara Dudas. So now I had a hypothesis. Well, Fanny and Clara probably were sisters because, you know, she's living in a house with Fanny and all that as a boarder. So probably a close relationship of some sort. So this was my hypothesis. If they're sisters, then Clara is obviously a descendant of Yaakov and Bessie, a child of Bessie, Yaakov and Bessie Dudas. And it makes sense with Bessie Obschuyler being named after grandmother. So what do I want to do? I want to find descendants of Bessie Obschuyler, have them DNA test, and if that proves it, or if they do DNA match on DNA, that helps prove it. Well, Bessie did not have any descendants, but she had a sibling who had descendants. They DNA tested. We had two of them DNA test. And in comparing to myself, my mom, and my grandmother, they were matching at the amounts we expected, and thus proving that that was correct. We later were able to find paper trail records, including a letter written by my great grandmother, which was amazing, that specifically mentioned Celia Obschuyler, who was Celia Gibraltar at that time, and then some of the other siblings. So that proved it for sure. But we proved it first through DNA before we had the paper trail confirmation as well. Now, another thing we can use with confirming a hypothesis is the Y-DNA. And this is for more distant ancestry, but remembering how inheritance happens from that first slide, the Y chromosome is inherited from father to son, almost unchanged each generation, or basically unchanged every generation. And so this project that I'm going to talk about was done through the Avotenu Western Sephardi Y-DNA project, which is run by Adam Brown and Michael Waz, as well as a lot of other folks who are part of it. And this project was for my Nunes Vaz line, which I've mentioned many times so far and shown a lot on already. And so we had all these multiple Nunes Vaz families that we assumed were the same family, but no paper trail connection. So if they all have the true same patrilineal line, then Y DNA should prove it because Y chromosome shows a patrilineal line. So the hypothesis, if each branch of the Nunes Vaz family is from the same paternal family, they should match through Y DNA. Now, looking at the family, there are 6 main branches that I want to get tested. There are the 2 Italian branches, one descending from Dr. Abram Nunes Vaz, born about 1670, another from David Nunes Vaz, who died about 1727. They're probably connected to each other. We don't know exactly how, but they're two very, they are not connected by paper trail yet. We also have my branch of the family, the Dutch branch, which descends from Jacob Nunes Vaz, who lived from 1697 to 1742. We have the two Jamaican branches, one descending from Jacob Nunes Vaz, who died 1810, and another from Phineas Nunes Vaz, who lived from 1800 to 1844. And the last branch, the Suriname branch, which descends from Ishak Nunes Vaz, who was born about 1755, died 1785. So I was able to get multiple cousins on my family tree to do Y-DNA testing for this. And so we had that set. So the next step, get everybody else to a male Nunes Vaz descendant to test. For the Jamaican branches, we got one from each of the separate branches, and both of them matched. And that proves for sure all three of these families, the Dutch branch and the two Jamaican branches, if we were be able to create a perfect family tree, we'd be able to find a shared ancestor through that patrilineal line. For the Suriname branch, unfortunately, we don't have any known male testers or male Nunes Vaz testers, because there was a generation where there was only one son and then he only had daughters. And so we don't know of anyone who still has the Y chromosome. We're still hopeful, though, because there's a couple of siblings of ancestors in that family tree that are unaccounted for. So we're hoping that maybe they'll turn up. For the Italian branches, we do have descendants, but it's been very difficult getting them to actually agree to do it. So still hoping for it. If any of them are watching, or if any of you know anyone from the Livorno Nunes Vaz family that's a Nunes Vaz still, please ask them to do a Y-DNA test. But this is a way to test hypotheses and prove them. We have proven that hypothesis with our Dutch branch and the two Jamaican branches, thanks to Y-DNA. And this is not something we would have been able to prove with autosomal DNA, the DNA tested through ancestry DNA or 23andMe or things like that. With Y-DNA, that's tested specifically through family tree DNA or doing whole genome sequencing and uploading to a Y-DNA comparison database. So now we're going to get into the thing I think people are really trying to get out of this talk the most. That's identifying the significant matches. Which match do I look into? And there's a few different techniques to figure out which ones you want to dive into, and it may depend on where you are in that part of the research. So the biggest thing is the longest shared segments. And I've kind of tried to harp on it throughout the presentation about each generation, those segments are getting smaller. But if we're related in a lot of ways distantly, and that's adding up to a larger total, that means the segments are going to be smaller than what we would expect. So when we look at the longest shared segment, that can help us gauge, is this a actual relationship where there's a close relation we can find within the paper trail? Or is this just going to be a lot of really distant relationships like 10th cousins and things where if you're coming from an Eastern European Ashkenazi Jewish ancestry, it's going to be very difficult to do or, accomplish. So less than 10 centimorgan longest segment, low confidence. You get a match with less than 10 centimorgan longest segment. It's possible that you're going to find a connection between you two, but it's going to be very, very difficult. And so that's going to be a match we're probably going to put at the end of the list. 10 to 20 centimorgan segment, that's about a medium confidence. We see someone with the longest segment between 10 and 20. It's not that great, but it's kind of like, okay, let's see what else is going on and try some of our other techniques as well. Once we get into 20 to 30 centimorgan's longest segments, that's where we get some really high confidence. So one thing that I find a lot of people are blown away by is after this talk, they'll go into their family tree DNA, or I forgot which other ones you can sort by longest segment. And when you sort by longest segment, it's surprising what matches pop up where you're like, whoa, that was like either a match where sometimes people will actually find like, oh, this match popped up. I looked and I actually saw how we were related, or something that's like, okay, I see they have this same family name, or just correlations where it was like, they did not expect that. And it can make a big difference. Anything over 30 centimorgans, very strong confidence. Another thing we can do is average length of segments. And I like to aim for a 10 centimorgan or higher average. Some people try to go for higher, some people say lower. It may depend on your list. The thing to really think about here is this is not about ruling out matches. This is about organizing the matches you want to focus on. So if you take the total amount of DNA that you share with a DNA match, you divide it by the number of segments that you have. So, let's say we have a 100 centimorgan match and they have 10 segments. Well, 100 divided by 10, that's 10, 10 centimorgan average. So that's right getting into what we want to look for. So this can be very helpful because maybe you have a 60 centimorgan match that's across 3 segments. That's a 20 centimorgan average. That's really good. But then you might have a match that's 100 centimorgans, but it's across 15 segments. Well, 100 divided by 15 is way less than 10. So that's going to be a match that you may end up actually putting behind your list, behind that 60 centimorgan match, because the 60 centimorgan match segments were so much more significant. Another big piece that has become very widely talked about thanks to Ancestry recently is shared match centimorgan comparison. So this is where you look at a shared match, or excuse me, you look at one of your DNA matches, and then you look at a list of shared matches you have with that DNA match, and it will show you how much DNA both you and your match are matching the shared matches. Hopefully that makes sense. That's a lot of jumping around jargon, but for a long time, this was only available through 23andMe and MyHeritage. Recently, Ancestry rolled it out as part of their Pro tools, and people have been absolutely loving it because Ancestry has so many matches. And you can utilize this to get a much better idea of what matches might be coming from a specific family. So with the longest shared segment and the average length of segments, that's to kind of just go through the list and figure out who should I even look into. The shared match comparison is where, let's say you have a second cousin of yours who's tested and you're trying to figure out that shared ancestry you have. Well, look at their shared matches, and then that's going to help you find matches where you can be connected through that specific line. And what you want to look for is you want to look for shared matches that are matching both you and your match at a significant amount. Now, I don't want to define what a significant amount is. It varies based on the websites and different things. The one thing I will say is what I've noticed on Ancestry is it seems to be 30 centimorgans is the cutoff. So if I have a cousin of mine through my Rosenberg line, which I have a lot of them, and I have a second cousin and I look through their shared matches, the matches that stand out that are significant where we've proven even better an actual connection, it always seems that both of us are matching it over 30 centimorgans. Now, this isn't always going to be the case, as we saw with my through lines before. We can have matches that are confirmed through the paper trail that are way less. But just in what I've noticed on Ancestry, when I would look at my shared matches from a known family, if I was matching them at 50 centimorgans and my match was matching them at 45 centimorgans, even though that's low, I'd look into it and I'd be surprised at how many times that would actually turn out to be useful. Not always, but that's kind of a way to utilize it for specific lines of the family. Now, I do want to emphasize this is only a guide. These are not hard, fast rules. We're not using these to rule out matches. I have more than enough experience in finding matches that are super small segments that would be ruled out based on these criteria that are proven in the DNA, in the DNA. And even cousins of mine that aren't that far out. Like I have a third cousin, or I think it's actually a second cousin once removed of mine, where we share like 30 some odd centimorgans, but then her father, I share like 150 centimorgans. So that recombination can happen quickly. And the segments we share, I think I was matching her 30 centimorgans across 4 segments. So it's not always going to fall in. And the other thing I should say, because I do get this question as well, is what about other endogamous population groups? We're talking about Jewish endogamy, but what about, if you are Pacific Islander or French Canadian or Creole or Cajun or something else? And you can apply similar ideas to those populations, but each endogamous population is different. And so it's going to change what you're going to look at. So Pacific Islander populations, they're much more intense in their endogamy. So you might want to have a longest segment that you're looking for. Maybe an average segment size of 15 or 20 centimorgans instead of 10. So you can adjust that. Now, recently, I was a consultant in developing this new auto cluster tool specifically for endogamy. It is now available through GEDmatch, their tier 1 tool. And before, when you did an auto cluster, that would show up as a big jumbled mess. So that's my father's auto cluster before the endogamy auto cluster. Here is the after. And all the endogamy auto cluster does is it gives you the options to set average segment size, number of, or the minimum segment centimorgan amount between you and your shared matches, and all how these matches are matching each other. Because what it's doing is it's comparing you to your matches and your matches to your matches as well. And then it's clustering them into these squares where you should find a shared ancestor between you and everyone in that square. So utilizing everything I just talked about with the segments, that is what we use with this auto cluster that is so useful. So if you have tier 1 on GEDmatch, or you want to get tier 1 on GEDmatch, I highly suggest it, and go play with this tool. It can be very helpful. So I know I'm going a little long, but hopefully you're all enjoying. But we have now we're going to get into the last case study I'm going to talk about. And here we have this match to my mother, who was 136 centimorgans, but then we have this largest segment at 51 centimorgans. Huge. So now we've identified the match. What do we do? Well, we want to hypothesize the approximate relationship based on the centimorgans. So remember all those charts we saw before in Laura Diamond's shared Ashkenazi survey? That's where this comes in. So we have 136 centimorgans with endogamy. Now, I'm going to estimate about third to fifth cousin range. Family tree DNA estimated a second to third cousin range, but as we know, it's usually either at the high end of the range or outside of the range. So I'm guessing about third to fifth cousin, but to be even more specific, I'm going to guess about a fourth cousin. Reason I do fourth cousin is because I figured, you know what, 51 centimorgan, that's a really strong segment. We'll guess right outside the range family tree DNA does. That should be good. So now we're going to start building the family tree of this match and look for common names and locations. Sometimes people hit roadblocks here, but I really highly suggest learning how to overcome the roadblocks of a match not sharing any family tree, or, not giving a lot of information. Sometimes there are a lot of workarounds to actually get that. But the main thing here is we know we're going for a fourth cousin distance. Fourth cousins share third great grandparents. So we're going to try to build both of our family trees out to third great grandparents. Because presumably, if I'm correct, we should find shared third great grandparents in both of our trees if we are fourth cousins. Or this is matching my mom, so if my mom's their fourth cousin. So now we're going to look at everything. We're going to think about surnames phonetically, and we're going to think about locations within 30 miles of the known ancestral towns. So here we have my family tree. And so here's my mom, and going up through her mother, and then we get to Harris Casino and Rachel Casino. And so that was the family that we need to keep in mind as we now look at the family tree for our match. And for this match, when we look at this family tree, well, we have this family name of Kazenovich. I forgot exactly how they pronounced it once they got to the US, because it was like Chasnowitz or something. I forget exactly. But basically, to me, I see Kazenovich, Casino, to me, that seems similar. We have this high match. This seems similar. What else can we find? Well, their Kazenovich family was in Fastov and Kiev. My family, we knew, came from Vasokiev and Kiev, right next to each other, basically. So having all of this information, now we create a hypothesis. Harris Casino and Isaac Chasanowitz are either brothers, uncle, nephew, or cousins. And we're basing that off of the idea that my mom and this DNA match are fourth cousins to each other. So now we've got an idea of what we're looking for. So now let's start to get into some next steps. And the biggest thing is to contact the cousins, contact the match. And sometimes when you can look into people's family trees, you might quickly find that even though they've DNA tested, it's somebody else who's like the genealogy nut. I'm sure a lot of us know that we're the one in our family tree. We manage tons of DNA kits and all of that. But sometimes you can find that. So sometimes you'll find other people. But one thing I always suggest, because I have some people that like to go old school and try the cold calling method, I highly recommend email or social media. Gives people time, gives to digest it, especially social media or online presence, gives them a chance to look into you and go, oh yeah, this is not a scam. But even better, if you find someone active in the genealogy community, contact them. So that's what happened here. This match was being managed by Evan Wolfson, who is a very active person in the Jewish genealogy community that many of you may know as well. And so I saw that. I contacted him, let him know everything what was going on. He was like, "This looks great. Let's jump into it." We started to try to expand everything further on both sides. At this point, I had no idea who my ancestor Harris's parents were, but we knew Isaac's parents were Pincus and Sima, so we had to start. So we found Harris's grave, and I know this is a little hard to read with just the lighting and stuff, but we found his father's name being Dove Bear. So Tzvi Bar Dove Bear, and that means Tzvi, son of Dove Bear. So we have his father's Hebrew name. Then we also found the death certificate, and that showed his father's name as Barney, and also gave his mother's name as Ides. Dove Bear definitely makes sense with an anglicized name of Barney. So now we had an idea of what we were dealing with for my side in Harris's parents. And so now that we know that, it's very doubtful that Harris and Isaac are brothers. We can rule that out because Isaac's parents are Pincus and Sima. Barney and Ides, it's really far apart. That's a big leap. So different fathers and mothers, but maybe their first cousins or an uncle nephew because we're going off of that fourth cousin estimation. So now it's a matter, can we find any documentation actually showing a link? And while we were doing this research, one of the things that I did was this was the impetus to get my grandmother to test, going, "Oh my gosh, we might have casino cousins." She was like, "Really? Let's do it." Her DNA test comes back, and this is how she matches this match. 146 centimorgans with a 67 centimorgan longest segment. So higher match indicates we're on the right track. So now let's investigate the hypothesis. So what do we know? We know that Harris Casino is the son of Dove Bear Barney Casino and Ides Casino. If the relationship is correct, then Harris's birth surname would be Kazenovich. Isaac is the son of Pincus and Sima. And if Isaac and Harris are first cousins, then Dove Bear and Pincus are the brothers. So now let's create a hypothesis tree just so we can get it in our minds of what it looks like. And so this is what we kind of expect to find. So now that we have this, we've got everything in place. Let's look in the paper trail. And thankfully, Alex Krakowski was digitizing tons and tons of stuff at this time. And we were able to find this revision list for the family. And so I know a lot of people can't read Cyrillic. So here's the English translation. We have Mordko Kazenovich, son of Itzko, his sons, David, Chaim, and Liba. And then we have Berko, brother of Mordko. Now I should note, Berko, Dove Bear, Barney, these all are correlating names. Sons of Berko, Gershko and Itzko. Well, Gershko, that is Hirsch, Svi Hirsch, Harris. So we're seeing a lot of things coming together. Now, even better, Pincus, another brother of Mordko. So everything's lining up right now. Sons of Pincus, Baruch, and Itzko. Itzko is Isaac. And even more, the age is all matched up. But for anyone who's familiar with these revision lists, you're probably like, there's the women as well. That's correct. The other page with all of the women. And I'm not going to make you read Cyrillic here. So here we have that listing. And what were we looking for? Well, who's Berko's wife? Ides. Hav Ides, daughter of Gershko, wife of Berko. And who's Pincus's wife? Sima, daughter, wife of Pincus. So this was following exactly what we were thinking. So is this hypothesis now actually proven? Well, based on the genealogical proof standard, not quite. Well, everything matches. There is not enough correlating information to be 100% certain. Now, I think there are some genealogists at this point who'd be like, this is enough for me. Maybe I'm a little bit of a stickler for myself, but I was kind of like, I'm feeling more 95% sure on this right now. So what next? Well, this research was started, 2018-ish, 2019-ish, and we've done a lot since then. Further DNA testing to better confirm, including other descendants of Harris Casino, so cousins of my branch of the family, other descendants of Isaac Kasenovich. So we now have tons of cousins on both sides. Well, on my side, not tons of cousins, but a few. And on the Isaac side, a lot more cousins. But also, we have this revision list. We were able to build that family tree thanks to the revision list all the way back to the 1700s, as well as tracing other branches forward. So, can we find descendants of other Kazanovich branches? Well, yes, we can. So, I like to show this. This is a through lines where we can see my ancestor Berko, Dove Bear, and my great great grandfather Harris. Well, look, we have DNA matches of siblings of Harris who were in that revision list we just looked at. Using the revision list, build the tree, build it down, DNA test them, test that hypothesis. We did that. Even more, getting more documentation. So records from Kiev, Vital, Census, Revision List, and with everything that Alex Krakovsky, Maxim Spivakowski, Anatoly Kromov, Victoria Khimshit, Sergei Fizulyanov, and all the so many other researchers in Ukraine are doing a digitization and uploading project. So much is coming online from the areas that are in present day Ukraine, and then records from the U.S. as well. So this is how we can actually utilize the DNA matches to expand upon our family tree. And with that, that is the end of the presentation. So I see we have a ton of stuff in chat. And I see we also have some Q&A. So I guess I'm gonna try to go through
So
and
Jarrett,
answer some questions.
Jarrett, Jarrett, first of all, amazing. Thank you. Like really astounding what the amount of material that you've just gone through in such a clear way. I would suggest that we look through the Q&A.
Okay.
We'll spend maybe 10, 15 minutes and then I think we should probably wrap up by 3:30.
Okay. So, let's see. Going through. Um, I see with the latest update from okay, sorry, I should say this is from Nancy N's iPad. With the latest update from Ancestry, I guess I can click answer live. With the latest update from Ancestry, I now have a lot of half cousins. Why and how did it change so much? I understand what it means, but I don't know how to figure out where the half comes into play. And I'm not 100% sure what you're talking about. I assume that you're talking about the relationship estimate. So what they're estimating your relationship to be, similar to kind of what I showed with family tree DNA. And if that's the case, it might be that they just updated the suggestions. But the other thing is that I do know that I've seen this in through lines a lot, where it'll say it's a half relationship. And sometimes that's just because the family tree that it's using to create that through line is just family trees built on ancestry. And you might have a cousin who built the family tree. And when they did it, instead of adding the shared couple, ancestral couple you have, they just added the father or just added the mother. And so, things like that might trick it. So that might be what it is. So let's see. So Nicola Kingsley, where my heritage suggests possible relationships based on shared centimorgans, and they have already identified Jewish ancestry, do they correct for endogamy, or does one have to do that oneself? One has to do that oneself. I do not believe they do any correction for endogamy. Ancestry, they don't really do it to correct for endogamy so much, but they have what's known as the Timber algorithm. And I know this question's from my heritage, but I figured I might say this. And the Timber algorithm is basically to, and I want to use the correct jargon here, downgrade DNA. Basically, they're not cutting out segments so much as cutting certain things down that have a higher likelihood of being a identical by chance segment. So not identical by descent, but just identical by the chance because of whatever's going on, which sometimes it can just be an error in the DNA. Because one thing to also remember with the DNA test, when they're reading the DNA, there's a 1% margin of error, and they're reading 700,000 markers on your autosomal DNA. And so 1% margin of error, well, that's about 7,000 markers that they're going to get wrong. So they kind of try to account for some of that with timber on ancestry, but it's not specifically for endogamy, I think. But I for all the companies, I highly recommend consulting Laura Diamond's Ashkenazi survey for that. Um, okay, let's see. Oh, let's see. An anonymous attendee asked, "What is an admixture?" And I guess I should say this. For a long time, people called them ethnicity admixtures. A lot of people are trying to get away from the use of the term ethnicity. But an admixture is just the uh, percentage readings of the DNA that the companies are giving you. So just the estimated admixture of your ancestry, that percentage. So that's what I meant by that. Um, Hopefully that clears that up for anybody asking that. Okay, let's see. Um, So I read trying to read through some of these, and since we have limited time, I want to get to ones that I can really answer well. Um, okay, I'll try this one. So Myra Schwartz Herman, taking endogamy and ethnicities into consideration, how would I begin to utilize this information to identify an ancestor that connects me to my biological father if I only match to one half sibling and a half niece through our shared maternal line? I've tested on all platforms with both Ashkenazi Jewish and Sephardic matches. Thanks for any tips. So it sounds like what you're saying is that you have done a DNA test. You have a half sibling and a half niece who have matched, but they're through your maternal line, but you're trying to identify your biological father. And if that's the case, you're already in a good spot because you can do something to figure out what matches are more likely on your father's side. So you have this half sibling and the half niece. What you can start to do is go through the matches that you're matching with this half sibling and half niece at significant amounts, and even better, ones that you can connect into this family that you have on your maternal line. I don't know how well built out it is, but assuming that it's built out enough that you might be able to identify maybe some second cousins and things through your maternal side, try to get those marked. And then as you then go through your DNA matches, you can use those when you look at matches you don't know to then try to see, okay, well, are they matching a lot of these maternal line matches and at an amount that might indicate it's on my maternal side? Because that's the difficulty with endogamy when you're dealing with a case like what you're discussing, where even though you're getting these matches, you're going to find they're matching everybody else that's Jewish. And so it can make it really hard to figure out, well, who are the maternal matches? Who are the paternal matches? One other thing you can try, that endogamy auto cluster, which I have this image up with a bunch of links. If you go to my main channel, the Genie Vlogger channel, I have a video going in depth about how to use the endogamy auto cluster and a little bit of the workings behind it. And so that might be useful for you because clustering, once you identify, well, which clusters seem to be from your maternal side, then the other ones start building out and trying to identify the ancestors of those matches to each other. And you might be able to find some where you find a bunch of matches where, oh, this matches in this cluster, they're matching each other. You must be related to all those matches through that same line. And then you can start taking further steps, such as what are the odds, which is a tool on DNA Painter. And I could kind of go on and on. It's a lot, getting into the unknown parentage research, but that's kind of ways that you can get through it. Being that you're on all of the platforms, you're going to have a lot of different tools available to you that's going to vary from each platform. So kind of utilizing what's available on each platform may be useful for that. So hopefully that gave you some ideas of where to look. I don't want to spend too much time on it, so we can jump some more questions. And I should mention, Avrami, at any point you need to jump in and tell me to stop. Just let me know. um,
No, everything, you're good. You can keep going.
Perfect. Uh, Okay, so S.L. Goldberg, my father was a Holocaust survivor, and we have some distant fourth and fifth cousins on his side. One known cousin on my dad's side is connected to someone on my mom's side. How can I use my heritage and ancestry to find more of my father's side? So this is where the shared match comparisons is going to become helpful, because you have these identified matches on the different sides. Um, and so when you look at those matches, look at the shared matches between both of you. And when you see the matches where you're both matching that shared match at a significant amount, start kind of making a list of those and start diving into some of those, and basically start building out their trees and look for what's the similarity between their tree and what you know on that side. So if you're using your father's the paternal matches of yours, then that's going to be helpful in terms of that paternal side. And then with the maternal side, using those maternal cousins. But you're going to see a mixture of both jumping into each other's list just because of the endogamy. But that's why that looking for a significant amount is so helpful. So the question here says my heritage and ancestry. So with ancestry, if you have Pro Tools, looking at that, like I said before, the thing that I noticed was kind of 30 centimorgans and below seemed to be the cutoff. So if I saw matches that was a shared match between me and a known match, and we were both matching them at over 30 centimorgans, those were the ones that I was like, okay, that stands out a little bit. And obviously, the higher, the better. Another thing you can do on Ancestry with their shared match tool is you can organize by closest relationship to you or closest relationship to your match. And that can be helpful because when you organize by closest relationship to your match, you can see what close matches they have in Ancestry that might be the significant match that when you look and see, oh, well, this is their first cousin through their mom's side, and that match is actually matching me pretty significantly. Well, that might be indicating, okay, this is look through that match's mother's side. It's all about getting more information to cut down the tree in terms of where you're looking, um, and trying to find that. And so, especially, if you have fourth, fifth cousins and your father was a Holocaust survivor, I imagine you know the town they came from. You probably know a little bit about, even if it's a small rural town or something. And so, knowing that area in the region can be helpful in identifying those matches as well. Because once you look through the trees, then you actually have to find the connection. So hopefully that helped with that. Let's see. I'm gonna try to find some a little bit more towards. Wow, there are a lot of questions. um, okay. Okay, here's a question. Alicia Weiss from Vermont. Very welcome development with GEDmatch's Tier 1 auto cluster tool. Do you know whether there are plans for an analogous modification to Watto to make it more useful for persons with known endogamy? Thanks. I don't know for sure if there's anything in the works or any plans necessarily. I know that Johnny Pro, who runs DNA Painter, he's always kind of looking for the newest, coolest things to kind of get working on, and he has a whole beta testing system and everything. But there is a company that came out recently called Banyan DNA, which tries to kind of solve that. They've said that it doesn't quite solve it just yet. It's much more helpful when you have known multiple relations or known pedigree collapse. But that is a more advanced version of what are the odds. So hopefully they'll come out with something with what are the odds, and hopefully we'll see all these tools just get better over time. But yeah. Oh, I just saw someone say something about Dr. Ross. I should mention I'm not actually a doctor. I think I've Rami put that as a little bit of a joke. So I'm not a doctor. Um,
But he could be a doctor, so we figured why not.
yeah, doctor of genealogy.
We're actually going to be offering a new educational program through Jewish Gen, a doctorate for a small donation.
Oh, wow. Okay. All right. So, all right, we have a genie question. Might as well answer a genie question. All I really want to know how I'm related to someone. I know that Genie allows you to see how you're related to someone. Do you mean building a tree for your match? Is it okay to build a tree for someone else on public platforms, i.e., Genie or e.g. Genie? Um, so yeah, Genie allows you to see how you're related to people with their relationship pathfinder, because Genie is a collaborative family tree. And for those who aren't familiar with collaborative family trees, these are family trees where the idea is that is one main tree that everybody works on. And if you build a profile that's already in the tree, it merges together, and then you just keep working on it. So it's all constantly merging together into one big tree. And that allows you to see all these very distant, crazy relations. A term that was coined by Steve Jaron is spaceball relations. So if you ever saw the movie Spaceballs, I am your father's cousin's nephew's former roommate, sort of thing. So you can see those on Genie, where it's your first cousins, husbands, nieces, great aunts, something like that. But for a lot of those, you can see the blood relationships there, but they're not always correct. And then um, you can fix things that aren't correct, but when you see a relationship on Genie, you don't always take it to heart. You need to research the line both ways. But Genie is one of three main collaborative trees. There's also Wiki Tree and then Family Searches Tree, which is just called the Family Search Tree. But when you say, do you mean building a tree for your match? That is what I'm talking about, but you don't have to necessarily build that tree for your match, specifically if the tree is already built. But I just say build the tree for the match, because in my experience, I end up building trees way more than just finding them, even when they supply them, because a lot of people supply very basic trees. Sometimes people supply trees where it's only like their mom and then their mom's parents, and they won't even put anything about their dad, or and they know the family stuff. They just didn't put it in. Um, and then for the question, is it okay to build a tree for someone else on public platforms? And in my opinion, I don't think that it's an issue. I think that there are some people that might find a little bit of an issue with it. The only thing I would say is do not put people's trees in a platform in a way where living profile information is public. So, if you do a family tree on Genie for someone that's a DNA match, Genie has privacy guidelines in place. So all living profiles that you put in, they're going to be private. So, if someone's living, don't put them in as deceased. And then as well, just being careful about who you do mark as deceased, because I know some people will go through and be like, born 1930, maybe they're deceased. And then it's like, oh no, they're actually still alive. And, you don't want to run into those issues. And then just being careful if you're putting other people's stuff online. When it comes to family tree building, I've built so many family trees for so many DNA matches, and I've done it on a lot of the platforms. But that's just, I always try to make sure, if I'm finding, especially finding stuff on like Facebook or Spokio or Been Verified, or places where it's like aggregated data, or things where it's like you're compiling information. Just consider that. But I personally think that it's fine to build someone else's tree on a public platform, just as long as you're within those proper guidelines. Uh, okay, Joshua, I also saw your ancestry allowed you to see how you are related to matches. How do you access that feature, or is that simply a regular tree with shared matches? So I think what you're talking about is through lines, which I showed. And that feature, you do have to pay for an ancestry membership. And what you need to do is you need to connect your DNA profile to one of the profiles in your family tree. So presumably your own profile, but if it's DNA for a cousin of yours or something, you can link it there. So like I have my main family tree on Ancestry, but I have probably about 8 or 9 different kits connected into it because I manage them, and they're all different people in the different parts of the tree. But once you connect that and you're paying for the Ancestry membership, then you'll get access to through lines. Um, okay. Let's see. Try to find some good some good ones. Um, okay, try to find something that's a little bit outside of what I already talked about too. Here's a good one. Jeffrey Mark Paul. Would you expect any shared autosomal DNA for a close Y-DNA match for whom the ancestor lived 10 generations ago? I would not. Even more, if you are matching autosomal DNA between this match, between this person, being that it's 10 generations ago, we can't be confident that it's coming through that same Y line. You might be matching through your Y DNA, but you might be connected autosomally in a different way because, as we know with endogamy, lots and lots of multiple relationships. Um, let's see. I can answer this one. Can I ask your help to find an unknown Jewish grandfather? And I have 26% Jewish DNA and a 577 centimorgan 8% shared DNA match in New York City. Um, I don't do anything like that anymore just because with my YouTube channel and stuff, every day I get about 5 or 6 requests of people looking for help. But what I do like to talk about is ways you can find help. And so if this is a search angel sort of case where, like you mentioned, unknown Jewish grandfather, basically your parent has an unknown parentage, then you can look for a search angel. There's a lot of organizations. I was part of an organization called, well, I still am, called searchangels.org. You can go on there and apply and get a search angel, and somebody will help you. Another way to go is to possibly hire a professional genealogist, which there's lots of ways to find professionals. A great way that I like to suggest is the Association of Professional Genealogists, apgen.org. And you can go on there and find genealogists by specialties and expertises. So you'd probably want to find someone who specializes in Jewish DNA. Um, so I don't help specifically, but I should say at this point, I do one-on-one uh, con- uh, conferences with people, consultations. They're limited to an hour, but if you do want to set up a one-on-one consultation with me, send me an email at my email, and that might be just enough to help you out. So we can just shoot me an email, and I'd be able to do that. But if you're looking for someone to like do lots and lots of work, which these can take hours upon hours, you might want to go find a search angel or a hire genealogist. Oh, wow. Okay. I can answer this. Judith Alexander, what do you mean about Italians and Jews being close and how they are plotted? So what I'm discussing is what's known as a DNA plot map. And it popped into my head in this presentation. I've never mentioned it before when I've done this presentation. But it's just a mapping. It's a graph basically where they're plotting the DNA similarities between various testers. And so what they find is they can find certain population groups are closer to others or overlap in various ways. And so they've found that when they plot the DNA of Jews, all varying Jews, we can see some of the different populations plotted somewhat differently, the Yemeni Jews and the Ashkenazi Jews and the Sephardi Jews, but largely overlapping each other. But then we can see that there's a lot of other Levant close by in other ways, and then other Mediterranean. And so that's what I'm talking about. So if you look up DNA plotting maps, you can probably find a lot that talk about this connection between Italians and Jews. Um, I'm gonna try to. Okay, we don't have too many. I'll go from the bottom up. Um, and then, Mark Friedman, what about building private trees? My question refers to building out other people's trees to check matches. Yeah, you can certainly build private trees. I think that for a lot of people, I think they're more comfortable in building private trees. There is a benefit to building on collaborative family trees for what I mentioned before, in terms of you build on Genie, and then let's say you put in a couple of ancestors for this match in Genie, and all of a sudden Genie says, "Oh, we already have these people in the family in the world family tree," and then it merges together, and then boom, all of a sudden you have a lot less work that you have to do. So yeah, it certainly can do private trees, but um, there are benefits to doing that on some of the other trees as well. Part of it also being what's known as cousin bait. You know, maybe they're not contacting you, but maybe another cousin of theirs wants to contact you.
Okay, Jared, I think we should probably wrap up.
All right.
Just to give you a break.
Yeah. I'm so used to doing this with my live stream. So for those that don't know, every Friday I do a live stream on my channel in the early afternoon.
Well, thank you very much. This was really so um, a topic that could be difficult to uh, articulate and to make it enjoyable. And you made it something that you simplified something that was very complicated and in a way that was an enjoyable experience. So thank you so much. And we hope that you will speak for us in the future.
Thank you.
Thank you to everybody who has joined us today and who's still with us, an hour and 42 minutes into this. Glad that you enjoyed. We will put the recording online and send it to you hopefully before the end of this week. We've been pretty good about that. And again, that's going to you be first before it's being publicized as a special thank you for registering. A special thank you to everybody who donated today in support of this program. If you have not yet done so and you would like to make a donation, we would greatly appreciate your help, especially at this time of year. It is very impactful. It helps set the tone for what we can accomplish in 2025. You can easily donate online. Go to the Jewish Gen website, and we thank you very much in advance for your help. Next week's talk will be on the topic of witness to history from Vienna to Shanghai. The speaker is Jean Hoffman Luanda, who wrote a book about this topic, and she has presented this in many, many different places. Should be very interesting. I hope all of you will join us. The registration link has already been sent out. We'll also include it in the follow-up email. Finally, there will be a survey in the email. Please let us know your thoughts about this talk, and also if you have suggestions for what we could do in the future. With that, Jarrett, thank you again. Thank you all for joining us. As always, we pray for our brothers and sisters in Israel, and I wish you a wonderful rest of the day and a good week ahead.